Today I want to talk about the concerning trend of blaming China for everything that goes wrong in the world. So if you've been following the news, you know that Israel just declared war on Hamas, and essentially what's going to unfold will be it's going to be horrific. Essentially, the United States and France and a bunch of other countries have greenlit the concept or the idea of destroying Hamas completely, which basically means Israel will flatten Gaza. Now, Hezbollah has also said they were going to help Hamas, and they've even launched some rockets into Israel. So this is an escalating situation, and in this, instead of every side calling for restraint and for every side saying let's figure out what's going on and punish the people that are responsible for this attack on Israel, basically there's a lot of countries just saying take them out, and there's a subset of people essentially saying that somehow China is responsible for this. And I don't want to get into the situation in Israel and in that area because there's too much unfolding, and I don't have any more information than anybody else who's making videos, and it's going to develop. So I don't want to say something that's not true or mislead people in any way. But I do want to talk about the bigger issue related to China, and that is blaming China for all of your problems. It seems to be the vogue thing to do. It's in style that whenever you have a problem, just blame China. And we can see this in this case with saying that China is backing Iran and Iran is backing the Palestinians and Hamas, and so therefore China is somehow responsible for this. But this goes much deeper and much farther, and it's gone back quite some time. I think it started really in the 80s and 90s when jobs started to leave manufacturing areas in the United States and the economy was slumping, and basically it was a way for politicians to redirect the blame and say, oh, it's not our fault. We're doing everything we can to support the economy and to keep jobs in the country, but China's somehow stealing them away. Instead of taking the blame and taking the responsibility for the bad economic policies that they had instated in their state or in their countries, they basically said it was somehow China's fault, that China was somehow responsible for stealing away these jobs. That's escalated, I would say, in the last 5 years. There was a lot of talk specifically around the global pandemic. It became very popular, especially with Donald Trump, to blame China for all the problems, right? If you have a problem, blame it on China. Even now, we have Chuck Schumer, who's in Beijing doing a little press thing, basically saying that America's drug problem is actually China's fault. And so fentanyl, which is a very deadly drug that has caused a lot of damage in the United States, is somehow China's fault. And the reasoning behind this is the precursor drugs that you make fentanyl with is produced and shipped from China. It's been tracked, and that is how they're taking it back to China. But China's not producing the drugs. These drugs are being bought by cartels in Mexico and other parts of the world, and parts of South America, where they take these chemicals and they make drugs out of them. And then they ship those drugs to the United States. And so you have all these senators and all these people in the United States saying the drug problem is actually China flooding the United States with fentanyl. But it's not really what's happening. China's selling chemicals, and those chemicals are being used to produce drugs. If that's the logic that you're going to use, then anything that China sells that ends up harming another nation, essentially, it's China's fault, right? So if China produces plastics and those plastics end up not being managed well in another country, meaning they aren't recycled or they aren't reused or they aren't properly disposed of, then somehow China's responsible for all of the pollution in that country. Even though when it came in, it was used in a toy or in a plastic bag or in some sort, right? It's never taking responsibility for your own actions. It's always easier to blame China. And this is one of these disturbing trends that I've been seeing. I mean, it goes back much farther than, the few years that I've been paying attention. It goes way back, like I was saying, into the 80s and maybe even farther back if I was to look into it. But I think the problem with this and why we should withhold this type of thinking and why we should refocus on who's responsible for the actions that are actually being blamed on China is because we have a theory of like the little boy who cried wolf. There's two problems with this. One, the people that believe it will believe China's bad regardless of what you say. And those people are essentially lost. You could say China is doing anything and they'll believe it. The other thing is it does actually numb the population towards more serious offenses that maybe China is carrying out. So again, like any country, China's just a country, and it has good and it has bad. And so when we focus everything on China and say they're responsible for everything, then they're essentially responsible for nothing, because it's like, okay, whatever, blame China. And the people that actually maybe should be focusing on some of the problems that could actually be addressed, and maybe there could be better solutions, and there could be pressure put on China to change the way they engage in the international community, all of a sudden is lessened, because it's like every time something's bad, it's China's fault. So those are kind of the two big things. Obviously, there's many examples. If the economy's bad, blame China. If you're losing jobs, blame China. If there's a homeless problem in your county or in your state or in your country, blame China. If there's a drug problem, blame China. It literally is the catch-all for when bad policy is being implemented in a country and the government doesn't want to take responsibility. All those problems that we are talking about, the economy, well, you could pass laws that prevent or better tax businesses. So you could prevent businesses from going overseas to begin with. Now it's a little too late, but they could have, if they had implemented proper policies when this was happening, they could have stopped many of those businesses from going overseas. And that could have been tax incentives, that could have been a whole policy basket that they could do to keep businesses in their country, whichever country it might be. In terms of homelessness, there's reports of Chinese buyers coming into like Vancouver and buying up all the apartments, and therefore that's the reason that there's a homeless problem and a housing crisis. Well, you could stop Chinese buyers from buying those properties. There are policies that you could put in place about how residential buildings are used and how they are maintained. You could put in policies that say they have to be, you could put in rent caps for one thing. You could put in policies that would require buyers to live in the properties that they own, and therefore you couldn't have investment banks actually coming in and buying up all the properties and then raising the rents. There's 100 things that you could do to stop these problems from escalating, but instead of that, these politicians and these people, media pundits and media organizations use it's China's fault, which I get it, because taking responsibility and enacting policies that are going to affect a large group of people who may or may not have any kind of economic power is going to upset somebody, right? So if you go in and you say, okay, there's a housing market shortage, which there isn't, but if you say there is a housing shortage and it's because investment bankers and because of overseas property buyers have come in and bought up all the properties and therefore the rent's going up, well, enact policies that stop that from happening. You're going to piss off the bankers and you're going to piss off the international buyers, but the local people will have a better housing market and more options to choose from, right? There you go. You solved your homeless problem. The other thing is you can also build more property, right? You have a drug problem. Well, why don't you implement policies that actually help the users get off drugs and not punish them for using it, right? Treat it like a health issue and not as a criminal issue. And then maybe you could get to the underlying problem for why these people feel the need to do drugs in the first place. If there is no market for the drugs, then it doesn't matter how many chemicals China ships to Mexico or other countries. If there's no market to sell fentanyl, then there is no drug problem. So if you deal with the underlying issues that are actually the problem, you could have a better society, but that's hard to do. And people don't want to actually do the work and take the responsibility. So it's much easier to blame China. And if that continues, you create the boogeyman of China, even though China maybe isn't doing anything wrong, or maybe isn't even responsible for the issue that you're blaming them for. I remember when the war in Ukraine broke out, everybody was saying Taiwan's next, China's going to take over Taiwan. It's going to happen within days or weeks or months. And now it's been going on, this conflict, this war in Ukraine has been going on for, 2 years now? And China hasn't made any move against Taiwan. So it's the same people that were saying China's about to invade Taiwan any moment now are back at it again, saying, oh, China's causing this issue in Israel because they want to invade Taiwan. Now, maybe they will. I have no information from, the PLA. I have no information from the CIA. I have no information that maybe some people have access to. But it's because it's the same people that are always tweeting the same things and coming on the news and saying the same things. I know that they don't have any more information than I do. And what they want is for China to be the bad guy because they have some personal stake in China's demise or our war with China. And I think we have to push back on that, because the more that media is allowed to spread, the more likely people will believe it. And then when something does happen, say there is an incident in the South China Sea or in the Taiwan Strait or somewhere, a ship gets sunk, or there is a plane that gets shot down or collides with another plane, or some issue happens, if everybody believes China's the bad guy because they've been told this basically their whole lives, then there will be no pause to say, do we really want a war that would destroy the global economy and put all of us back 100 years? Nobody comes out on top with that war. China doesn't succeed, and if China doesn't succeed, all of the manufacturing that is done in China fails, which means the entire global economy fails. And I think a lot of these people who are saying and promoting and pushing this idea of China wants war, we want war with China, is they don't actually understand the full consequences of that type of conflict. If Ukraine can't be successful with all the backing of the United States and NATO and all the allies that it has against Russia in a very what should be one-sided, if they can't succeed, then how do you think it's going to play out with China and the United States? Even if the United States isn't directly involved, but they send a lot of aid to Taiwan and they get the international community to support Taiwan, Taiwan's not going to fare any better than what's currently going on. And the economic impact of that would be devastating to everyone. Because if China's economy gets caught up in a wartime economy where they're no longer producing all the stuff that they produce, and they're only focused on weapons production and ammunition and fighter jets and planes and bombers and ships and tanks and everything else, then everything that they're producing and shipping internationally ceases. They no longer have trade routes, and they no longer can ship their goods without military support, which they currently don't have, right? The international community currently relies on the Navy, the United States Navy specifically, for that shipping support, right? That's what happens when a ship ends up in trouble. They call for the U.S. Navy, and that Navy shows up to help them. If China can't ship because they're at war with the United States and their ships are being captured or sunk, then none of the stuff that China produces goes out to the global economy. Maybe you get some rail freight, but most of their rail freight goes through Russia. And if an all-out war starts between, everybody's saying it's going to be Russia, Iran, and China against essentially the world, then freight's not going to go through China into Russia, into Europe, because that's going to be cut off. So I don't think people who are pushing for this idea or this concept that we could quickly go to war with China and win fully understand what's going on. And the fact that everybody's blaming China for their problems is setting up a dynamic that it's been set up for a long time, that China's the bad guy and anything China does is wrong and bad. And that creates a system and a mindset and a certain perspective that just isn't true. And I think that politicians, specifically in other countries, need to understand that China's not really the enemy. Now, are they an adversary? Maybe. Are there areas of competition? Absolutely. And instead of shunning that competition, these countries should be stepping up and saying, you know what? You have technologies, we have better technologies. You have universities and you have trade partners, we have better universities. We have better trading partners. We can create better deals than China. And therefore, the allies that we have are loyal to us because of the benefits we provide them and not because of our military might. They actually want to work with us, and we are a better partner on the global stage than China is. And quite frankly, because China is beating the United States on the global stage in terms of partnerships, this is where we're seeing the blaming come in. And anytime China does anything, they're doing it wrong. Or anytime something happens in somebody's own country, China's the one responsible. So if you agree with this statement, give it a thumbs up. Let me know in the comments what you think about blaming China for everything. Also, let me know in the comments what you think about this new conflict that's just kicked off. Obviously, in the next couple of days, we'll find out more about what's going on. And hopefully it can be resolved quickly and with the least amount of bloodshed. Unfortunately, based on the people who are supporting the war, and I don't think this is going to end quickly. And I don't think it's going to end without a lot of bloodshed. So we're living in interesting times. Leave a comment below and let me know what you think, and I will see you in the next video.